Hello, I'm Danica Lorer, and this is Lit Happens, your celebration of the literary arts in Saskatchewan. Today, we welcome Dee Hobshawn-Smith. Nice to see you, Dee.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for asking.
So, Dee, tell me a little bit about what led you to becoming a writer.
Well, it was an interesting path. I actually decided when I was a teenager that if I wasn't going to be a vet and I wasn't going to be a writer, because God knows writers don't make any money, that I would do something practical that traveled. So I actually became a chef and ran a restaurant in Calgary, had a catering company, taught thousands of people how to cook. But by 2005, I'd been writing about food for the Calgary Herald for many years by then after selling my restaurant. And I realized that I wanted to write things other than food. I didn't want to write any more recipes. I didn't want to write any more books about food. I'd started writing, rotten poems and crazy bad little pieces that weren't quite stories. And I showed them to a couple of writer friends who said, you could use some help. So several people pointed me to Sage Hill writing experience, which is where I first went in 2005. I have since been there 6 times, and it's been a wonderful tool for me to figure out how to become a better writer and to, make connections with other writers in the country. So 10 years, 11 years now, 11 years. They say that most apprenticeships take about that long. So I view it as my second apprenticeship. If it took that long to become a good cook, and it did, then now I'm becoming a better writer after having been working at it for 11 years.
So you started with, or one of the stopping points on the way was Sage Hill, and you've also been involved with the MFA in writing at the University of Saskatchewan.
That's right. Yeah.
So how did you decide to go into that program?
How did I decide? Well, the goal was always just to become a better writer, and it felt like a sensible thing because I didn't have a whole lot of experience working with other writers. I hadn't done much in the way of workshopping other than Sage Hill, and I didn't have a literature degree behind me. I had a culinary training like crazy, but it felt like a sensible thing. Part of it was I thought that it would help validate my growing sense of myself as a writer to myself. Well, I'm a writer now. I have a degree. I'm a writer now. I've written books. I'm a writer now. So a lot of it was simply me figuring out that at what point I actually was comfortable and ready to say, all right, here I've become a writer. And the MFA program had a lot to do with that, I think, because I worked in several genres, which has always been my interest anyways. I write essays, I write poetry, I write fiction. And when I finished, I thought, okay, a novel is coming out of this. A novel is, well, that really means I'm a writer. So self-validation was a big part of it.
And so you've taken the step to learning from other people, and now you're mentoring people through the work with the Saskatoon Public Library Writer-in-Residence program. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm the 35th Writer-in-Residence at the library in Saskatoon. And it's a really cool deal. It's a big deal, I think, and I'm really humbled to sit in the chair that's been occupied by, Vander Haig and Martel and Candace Savage and my partner, Dave Margocious, and Jeanette Lyons, and this long stream of other really, really fine Canadian writers. The thing is that the writer-in-residence helps other people become better writers. It's a community service, and I spend a lot of time in one-on-ones with writers, helping them become better writers. And I do workshops as well, and readings. But the cool thing, though, is that in helping other people become writers, I think writers themselves improve their own sense of craft and awareness and knowledge of what good writing is and what good writing isn't, should be, could be. And of course, there's this huge wide variance. Every one of those genres is a huge tent. So I'm a much better writer now than when I began this 6 months ago, and I'm a much better reader. And I know that I can see that I'm helping other people, which is really, really exciting to see them suddenly go, I get it, and they bring in better work. So that definitely means it's working.
Well, and we often think of writing as such a solitary experience, but it really does improve with community.
I really believe that. I really believe that, yeah. Community is important to us because, as you said, we're solitary creatures, mostly by inclination, I think, but also by practice, because I think it's impossible to write. Well, I've written work in a public and noisy place, but the actual revision I need to do in silence in, you know, a relatively quiet environment. So that takes a lot of time. When we actually are back together with other human beings, I think people kind of, you know, writers tend to let their hair down a bit. But the writing can really blossom. There are writers for sure that don't have a writing group, that don't necessarily go to a writer in residence, who produce fine work. But I think that a cool second set of eyes is a really, really valuable tool, because it's hard to be objective about, oh my God, about my baby, you know. And as a writer, I have to find eventually I have to find a way to view my writing with the kind of dispassion that helps me say, okay, this I'm keeping, this not so much, this I'm going to let go of, this I'm going to revise. It's a difficult process if I still carry a really hot emotional charge about that piece of work. So someone else's eyes helps me cool the process down, I think.
Wow, that's really interesting. And some people will take 10 years to write one book, and some never get anything published.
Yeah.
Now, you've had 3 books published in the last 4 or 5 years. So that's really, and you're working on more. So tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've had published in the last few years.
Well, saying it that way, Danica, doesn't quite give the true picture of the years behind it, because my poetry collection, Wildness Rushing In, came out 2014, but it took 8 or 9 or 10 years, 8 or 9 years, I guess, to actually write, polish, get to the point where, you know, the work was worthy of coming out. And the short stories in What Can't Be Undone, I started working on them. One of them was one of these really rotten, not very good, just a little segment that I showed to my friend, and she said, Sage Hill, get going, get going. So it does take years. All of these books have taken years to do, and I think that's just the truth. I know friends, I know people who have published work that has taken 10 years, 15 years, 17 years. I'm terrified of that kind of number. I can't imagine spending 10 years on a book. I can imagine, and I recognize that books take multiple years. I'm working on a novel right now, and I'm 3.5 years in. I'm going, yeah, okay, fine, but you know, I don't want to have it stretched to 10. So it's a slow process. The stories, I pull a lot of the ideas for my work out of my own life and out of the people immediately around me. You know, I'm one of the magpie writers. I know there are other writers who take a more intellectual and academic approach, but I'm really a magpie, and it works for me. It works for me. So some of the stories in this collection have, you know, it's always, you know, you don't ever want someone to recognize themselves in the piece of writing. So it's a good practice to find ways to get, oh, that's a really good idea, oh, that's a really interesting trait, and then completely transform them so that whoever it was that originally inspired it will read it and go, oh, this is really interesting, and it go right past them that maybe they were, you know, he or she was the trigger. So finding the ideas is an ongoing process for short stories in particular, which I really, really love. And I have a file, I have papers beside my desk, I have papers in my pocket. Whenever I do yoga, I have a notepad over there just in case. So the ideas have to get written down, because without the ideas, a writer doesn't have anything to write about. And what I know about my own brain is that it doesn't retain things, right? Oh, idea, oh, good, oh, an idea. And then 10 minutes later, I'll be going, what was it, if I haven't gotten it onto the page? So I have a file and little bits of paper that I routinely transform into the file, so they're no longer just little bits of stuff that don't mean anything. And when I kind of go, well, I need to start something new, I have somewhere to go to dig at and go down the well.
And so when you're, I guess when you have poetry and short stories and novel, there's some overlapping. You're not just working on one thing all the time. Do you find it helps you to be able to have more than one thing going on at a time?
Yes. I've heard people say, oh, I have writer's block. And my process is that if I feel stuck on what I'm currently writing, which is this novel, or I simply need a break, I have several genres that I can go to. I'm not working on any short stories right now. I'm working on the occasional poem, then they just go into the box because that's the best practice. Put it away, let it get cold. But what I am writing is I'm working on an essay collection that I have the majority of them written. They need revision, but I have a couple more ideas that I need to put on paper. So I wrote an essay a couple months ago, and I think it's pretty done. When my novel says, go away, just go away, then that's what I go to, is I'm working on one of my essays.
Nice. And you have Food Shed with you as well. Would you like to say a few words about that as well?
Thank you. I would like to say something about this book. I had a long career in the food world in Alberta, and part of that was deeply involved with local food and slow food and people who produce good, clean, and fair food. So what I decided I really needed to do was to write about how people grow food if they're growing on a small, sustainable scale, and what the politics are, the government's involvement, which isn't not always beneficial, I have to tell you, what the issues over water are, what the issues over labor, the issues surrounding succession planning, the issues over money, the issues over illness, the issues over getting hurt on the job. It's a really dangerous thing. So I ended up writing about 78 growers and producers in Alberta, and traveled all over the province and included recipes. It's not a cookbook, but because I'm a gate to plate kind of cook, I thought, well, a book that's about literally gate to plate should include recipes so people can say, oh, what do I do with that lamb now that I have a lamb shoulder in my freezer? So recipes, and it's organized as an abecedarium because alphabet books are just so much fun. But it's a serious book. I mean, there's some humor in it, but it's a pretty cool look at the politics and the challenges of growing food. And the challenges here are the same as they are in many other places on this continent and others. So it's kind of a representative look at what it means to be a food grower or producer in this decade.
Wow. Well, you've done so much great work, Dee, and you've educated us today. As the writer in residence, you've given us some really helpful tips about keeping notes and making sure we don't let those ideas slip away from us. So where can people find your books?
Local bookstores are best. McNally Robinson is a terrific resource in Saskatoon and in Winnipeg, and they ship happily. You can also find my books directly from me. You can also find them online at Amazon. You can find them through me at my website, which is, of course, my long name with .com strung on the end. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Dee, for being with us today. This has been Lit Happens on Shaw TV. You can find past episodes on YouTube at Shaw TV Saskatoon. Thank you for watching. I'm Danica Lorer.